Hi, welcome to the Visiting Artist Lecture Series for Spring 2022. The lecture in this series, or the next lecture in this series, is February 8th with Glenn Ligon. I want to encourage you to visit the Art and Art History website for more information about this historic program and all upcoming presentations. This presentation will include the artist talk followed by a short Q&A moderated by me. You can type your question in the chat box to the right of the video on YouTube during or immediately after the artist talk. My name is Catherine. I use she, her PGPs, and I'm an MFA candidate in printmaking here at CU Boulder. I'm very honored to introduce photographer Alanna Airitam. Airitam's work focuses on historical misrepresentation and the erasure and manipulation of history through portraiture and bonita still life subjects. Rooted in a critique of art historical conventions, her practice questions stereotypical or unequal representation of Black people in art spaces that continues today. Born in Queens, New York, and now residing in Tucson, Arizona, she is an elected board member for Oakwood Arts in Richmond, Virginia, and is a co-founder of Southwest Artists Network in Tucson, Arizona. Airitam is a 2020 San Diego Art Prize winner and a recipient of the 2020 Michael Reichman Project Grant Award. She is currently exhibiting work in Subject Object, an exhibition at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York. Her work has also been exhibited in Art Miami, the Candela Gallery in Richmond, Virginia, the Catherine Eidelman Gallery in Chicago, the Colorado Photographic Arts Center in Denver, the Pentimenti Gallery in Philadelphia, and the San Diego Art Institute. Her work is also part of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts collection, so please join me in welcoming Alanna Airitam.
Hi, thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you, Ben, for doing all the Genius Tech stuff, and Megan and Kirsten for having me here in the University of Colorado at Boulder. I'm really excited to be here this evening to share a little bit about myself and my practice with you all. Before we dive into the work and the process and all that other stuff, I thought I would give you just a little bit of background on me. I am a self-taught photographer. I'm originally from Queens, New York, and I've pretty much made my way west through Dallas and then to Southern California, and my studio is now in Tucson, Arizona. I feel like I've always been a art person, even if I didn't really understand exactly where this whole career was going. I was a bit of a loner kid. I sat in my room a lot. I have 3 brothers, so I learned to just be alone. And I spent a lot of time in my room listening to music, writing stories, drawing pictures. And the weird thing was that I realized that the pictures that I was really drawn to and gravitated towards drawing were always people, specifically faces. I would sit for hours and just draw details of eyes and like making the hair perfect. And there was just always something about the face and the facial features that was important to me and really drew me in. And I think that's probably, looking back on it in hindsight now, I think that was probably seeds for me being a portrait artist. Not exactly sure where that came from, but it was, these pictures that I were drawing, they were like people, but not people that I knew. They were fictional characters, but they always had backstories. They always had personalities and, stories to them. They lived. And so if something about that, I'm still trying to unpack. It's definitely a thing for me. There's something about the person, the human figure that is captivating to me. So I would do things like, I was, a loner kid, like I was saying, so a bit weird maybe. Like I would have my records on my record player, and I would have my album covers sort of like leaning up against the record player, and it was always the album covers that had the artist faces on the covers that were my favorite, because I would sit them up there and then I would pretend like they could see me in my room, and we would just like draw pictures together and stuff. I was, not much has changed really. But that's just a kind of little bit of a background into how I think where the seeds of this sort of started for me. As I was growing, I also started to, create more elaborate type of things. I would use objects, and I would create, little assemblage pieces and things like that. Um, Fashion was always a really big part of my, what I did as a kid. I was always drawing figures in clothes, so fashion and the form was always a part of that for me as well. All of these things seem to be coming back around into my art practice now, and it's really interesting to think back on it because when you're a kid and you're doing these things, you don't realize where all this is going, or if it's going anywhere, or you don't even think that you're just doing it. It's fun. As an adult, you really can look back and see the progression of how things have started and where it's going. So, I'm there at home, and I'm thinking now, like, getting out of high school, and what do I want to do? I want to go to art school, and I remember telling my dad this, and he really discouraged me from doing that. He said, you really should get a job with a paycheck. So I couldn't afford to go to school on my own. I went to a community college for about a year or so, studied the sort of rudimentary beginnings of Photoshop and Illustrator and layout design, and I put together this very basic portfolio, and I shopped it around and started getting these jobs in ad firms, working in what we called the pit. So it was the design pit, which was basically where all the production artists would work. And production art was largely receiving work from the art directors and the designers to change from, like, change a color from red to blue, or put an outline on this or something, very basic stuff. But in those positions, I realized that I was most of the time the only woman in those spaces, and absolutely, definitely the only woman of color in those spaces. So I had to learn to shut my mouth and put up with a lot of really sort of harsh, I couldn't even call them microaggressions. They were definitely, the environment that you could imagine, a room full of men doing art. And so you endure the jokes and all the stuff that kind of comes with that. And I did this work for like 20 years, moving up the ladder as I grew, and made myself into a art director position right before I left in 2017 was the last time I was in a cubicle. So I'm going into my 5th year anniversary of no cubicles. And and it's interesting, again, thinking back to who I was as a child. Like, I had no reason sitting in a cubicle. I was not meant to be there at all. So it was a really interesting process, and to go through and to see how all of that has played a part in my current practice today. So I think I'd like to share my screen. Ben, if you can, let's bring up. Let's see, how do I get this into a presentation mode? There we go. All right. So as I left my like I said, my job, my last advertising job in 2017, I knew that I was going to have to go into another job. I was living in Southern California at the time. There's no way you can be out of work living there. So, it was inevitable that I was going to have to go and shop around for another job. But there was a depression looming with the thought of me having to go back into another cubicle, and wondering, Like, is this my life? Is this what I have to endure? The way that I was able to stave off the depression was to ask friends to come over and sit for me. And because I knew that if I had a commitment from people to come over and sit, that I couldn't get out of it. You know, I had to take the photo. And so I was making a commitment to myself to pick up the camera every single day. I didn't know what I was going to make. I didn't have a clue where any of this is going. I didn't even know it was going anywhere. For me, it was just a way to stay healthy. So out of this, the Golden Age was born, which is a series of 10 portraits. The background on this is that, you know, again, I had people come over to sit for me, so I didn't really have an understanding of what it was I was creating at the time. I just knew that I liked taking photos of people. And so to make it more interesting for myself and for them, I dressed them up. Didn't have a wardrobe, didn't have any money for a wardrobe, didn't even know I needed to make a wardrobe. So I just went into a Rubbermaid bin full of fabric remnants that I had left over. And I started draping them on my friends. And as I was draping this fabric on them, I realized that these characters were starting to come out. And I really liked what I was seeing. I really liked the images that I was getting. And so I just continued. And every day there was a new one. And it was probably around the third one that I photographed that I started to understand what this work was about. And it blew me away because I didn't know I was making anything. I didn't know that there was a story in there. It was a beautiful moment that I wish as an artist that I could go back to every single time that I go to make a new project, because it was so pure and there was no doubt in there whatsoever. There was no questioning. It was just allowing this idea to come through and surrendering to that, trusting it. So if I'm draping a piece of fabric on someone and it doesn't feel right, I'll continue to drape it until it feels right, and then I'll take the photo. If I put a necklace on someone and it doesn't feel right, I'll take it off and maybe try something else until it feels right. And I just really went with these feelings. And then these stories started to come out. I started realizing that I hadn't seen pictures of people who look like me in museum and art spaces ever. You know, I grew up going to museums and spending a lot of time sitting there in these rooms filled with these beautiful Dutch portraits and these beautiful still lifes. And none of it, as gorgeous as it was, none of it related to who I was. I felt so removed from all of this work. And I think that's why it took me so long to give myself permission to engage in an art practice, to make work like this. I had no idea that A, I could, and B, that it was okay to do. So there was that moment of recognition that, oh my gosh, I'm making work that I wish I had seen as a child. If I wished I had seen this as a child, then I know that there are other young people that need to see work like this. They need to see themselves represented in a beautiful way, a way that's positive, in a way that's empowering, not just seeing ourselves on these museum walls faded out into the background, you know, painted over at the feet of somebody. Like, we deserved to have a more powerful presence because we were there. We were there, and we were not always someone's servant. Okay, so I just thought that it was really, really important that we show Black people in this context. But also, as I'm making this work, I'm starting to realize that there is this interesting overlap, because I started thinking about like the 17th century Dutch Renaissance and all of this beautiful creativity and work that emerged from that time. And it came out of the 80 Years' War and all of this, this trouble and this darkness that they were going through, this change, right? And so I started thinking about, well, what is our Renaissance? When was our Renaissance? Well, it was the Harlem Renaissance. Well, the interesting thing about that is we have Harlem, New York with one A, and we have Harlem in the Netherlands with two A's. Both of them, the epicenter of creativity for those times. And so I started to realize that there was this beautiful overlap in these moments of creativity. And so I wanted to name I wanted to sort of pay homage to Harlem, New York, and the creativity that came out of the Great Migration by naming the portraits after either street names or landmarks that were present during that time. For example, Madison is a street. I also gave them the name Saint to elevate them in the same way that the nobility, the people of nobility were painted. Their portraits were painted in the 17th century. And so I wanted to elevate them to that level. St. Nicholas is another one. That's a street. St. Monroe. We also have St. Minton, for example, who was, I'll go back, St. Minton. Minton's is a jazz club. I believe it's still in existence now. I think it closed for a little while and it came back into life. But it was a jazz club where all the greats played.
Hey, Alanna, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben. Your slideshow is frozen on our side, I'm afraid.
Oh, no. It is? Okay. Should I get out of it and try it again?
Yeah, just go ahead and close the presentation, and then let me see if I can. Okay, let's see now. Change slides, and let's see if it keeps moving. Okay.
Are we good?
Okay, we're good. So sorry.
That's okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I don't know how long it's been frozen. I don't know where you guys were.
We were waiting. This is my fault. We were waiting for the first slide.
Oh no!
And
you
I was
guys
like, wow, she's talking about the slide but not showing it.
Oh no!
So sorry.
I'm so sorry. Well,
I would pull myself back out, and then you might want to show the slides that you've shown already. Again, I'm afraid.
For sure. Okay, thank you for letting me know. Let's just see if this works. Can you guys see this? Are we good?
Yeah, it looks good. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, my apologies. I didn't know. So let me get over to St. Minton, for example. He's one that was named after a landmark, and it was important for me to put some of these landmarks in because Harlem is, getting very quickly gentrified, and a lot of these spaces are going away. And that really speaks to, again, this sort of erasure of history, erasure of our past and the things that we've accomplished. And so it was important for me to sort of anchor that in, to pay tribute to it, to make sure that in some way we were able to keep it. St. Lennox is another one. Dapper Dan is one that is actually not named after a street or a landmark. He is a person from the hip hop era, a designer who moved on to do really great things. And I just wanted to pay tribute to him. I grew up in New York during the very early 80s, late 70s. So, breakdancing and hip hop was just coming in, and Dapper Dan was the guy that was dressing all of the greats. And so I wanted to pay homage to him. Queen Mary is another one that is not named after a street or a landmark, but she is to me, she is the period at the end of the sentence of all of the 10 portraits in this series. So as you
Alanna,
see, yes.
so sorry to interrupt again. It's frozen again.
Oh, no.
Could you please leave presentation mode?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so yeah, I think we might have to stay in the
that's okay. Is that fine? I mean, can you see it okay?
Yeah, it looks great now.
Gears here, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's moving in real time. So okay. I'm gonna remove myself again and hopefully never be seen again.
I'm so sorry, guys. I don't know tech issues.
We've got like 4 different systems. Any one of them, can crap out. So. Okay, sorry. I'm gonna get out of the way.
Probably in retrograde or something else like that. Thanks, Ben. So yes, the Queen Mary is, she is not named after a landmark or a street in Harlem, but she is the queen. And Queen Mary is actually a rebel from the islands that actually helped to free a bunch of slaves. So she, to me, speaks volumes. And she is at the end of, I like to put her at the end, although she's at the beginning here. I do like to put her at the end of the 10 portraits because, as you see, most of them are offering something to the viewer. There is an offering of fruits or flowers, which, as you know, with the Dutch still lifes, you'll see these tables that are overflowing with fruits and flowers and lots of symbols, right? These, to me, were symbols of abundance, symbols of greatness and brilliance and beauty and all of this stuff, right? All of these things. And it was important for me to put this stuff in here because during the making of this work, I'm coming out of this very corporate environment, but not only was it the sort of strict, confined structure of that corporate world that I was trying to release from, but there was a lot of stuff happening in the news, as there is now, around police brutality, around the abuses to Black bodies, and this sort of narrative that continues to persist in our zeitgeist around Black people just not belonging here, and our lack of beauty, meeting the beauty standards, are us not being smart enough to hold certain positions, these stories that we all hear. And to me, they were just so false and so just lies. Like, I didn't know anybody in my life who was a thug. I didn't know anybody in my life that deserved the labels that we were being given. And so it was important to me to create work like this, where at the end of the sentence, you have this woman who is not only offering you this beauty, but she's also offering you this key. And she's basically saying, you already have all of this inside of you. You don't need to look outside of yourself for any of this. This is yours. You have it. It is you. And so it is a message that I felt was very important for people to take away. The other thing that was important about this work for me was how I showed Black men and the presentation of Black men. For example, when I show this work, I really do try to hang it in a way that is as close to eye level as possible. I chose the size of prints at a 24 by 36 size to try to mimic or emulate something that was as close to life size as possible, so that you're face to face with these people, you're building a relationship with them. And hanging these portraits at an eye level means that you're confronted with these people. You have to look at this Black man in the eyes. And so often I feel like Black men do not get that privilege. When you're walking down a street, I see people avert their eyes so they don't make eye contact out of fear, you know. And I thought, I want to dispel this idea that that there's something to be fearful of. You know, we're all human beings and we should be treated with the same sort of respect. And so to have these men in this position of vulnerability and beauty and softness while also being strong and powerful was very important. Finishing the work is also a very important thing for me in all of my projects. I've decided to varnish these prints. When I first started, I printed them, I put them in a, you know, frame with traditional glazing, and I hung them on a wall. And I just looked at them and thought, I feel like there's a barrier between me and these people, and I want people to be able to build a relationship. So how can I do that? How can I get rid of the glazing? Plus, I have a lot of black in my work, and so if you don't use Optium, you know, like museum plexi, then it's just a mirror. And so that's very expensive, and it was very expensive for me starting out as an artist, and so it's expensive for me now. So I decided to try different processes to try to not just bring the viewer closer with the portraits, but also to, you know, give myself some options in terms of how I can present this without, you know, going broke. And varnishing seemed to be the perfect solution to that. It lends itself to the painterly quality of the portraits already there, and I don't need to have a piece of glass in front of it. It also makes it very livable, whereas photography can be very precious. You know, you have to stand back away from it. You can't touch it. You have to wear gloves, you know, all of it. With this, you can live with it on your wall. You can wipe it down very softly with a micro towel, and it's good as rain, right? Like it's perfect. And so I love the fact that it became this very livable piece of artwork that you can really engage with. So, you know, I really try to be thoughtful about how I'm finishing my work, and how I'm presenting that. That's a huge part of the story that I try to carry through all of my work. From Golden Age, I started in on Crossroads, which is a series that I started, maybe a year or two into the Trump administration. I was a little disappointed about it, and I had some feelings around it. You know, like the way that it was this administration was making it okay to hate people, to cancel people, to I don't know. It just felt like we were going into this really dark place, and I was feeling pretty bad about it. I wanted to make some work to try to give myself some relief. So I started in on Crossroads, which is, for me, a way for me to take back a little bit of that power. I wanted to avert the gaze, not out of shame or fear, but in an empowering way. I wanted to ask people of color to turn their backs on what we were being given, on what we were being handed, and look towards new solutions, because we continue to go to the same sources to request relief from the things that are oppressing us, holding us back, and it's not ever really getting resolved. And so I'm wondering, to start a conversation, how can we do this ourselves? What more can we do? Like, should we start looking towards a new direction that we can start moving in ourselves to find solutions for these things? So these were sort of the questions that I had for myself that I wanted to explore, while also sort of turning my back and turning my gaze away from all of this horror that I was seeing. I just didn't want to participate in it, and I didn't feel like we needed to participate in it. So I did ask friends to come over and sit for me. men and women of color. And always when I have people come in to sit with me, I lay out the project for them, except for with Golden Age, because I had no idea what I was doing there. But with Crossroads, you know, I thought I want to be very thoughtful about this, and I want the people who participate in this to be on board this message. I don't want to put words in their mouth. I want them to embody this in a way that allowed them to speak about this in their own way, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't want to put words in their mouth. I didn't want to have them sit for me and then go and then talk about this project and have them be a part of it without sort of co-signing on these ideas. So we had lots of participants. There's 10 in this series. I pulled it back down to 10. I thought 10 was a good number. I thought about continuing to work on this project, but at some point I just decided I was done. I got it out of my system. So there's 10 portraits in this series, men and women of color. Some of them are people from when I was living in San Diego, and then I had moved over to Tucson in 2019. So I started to ask people in Tucson to sit for me as well. These portraits are smaller in size. They're like a 9.25 by like 11.25 or something like that. And they are very heavy. I construct these, first of all, I print them on metal. And I weld a metal frame around the print. And then here's me welding. And then I pour resin on top to fill up that frame. And so they are really heavy bricks. And the heaviness, again, the finishing of this work speaks to the weightiness of the subject. It gives it this really interesting underwater quality as I've mixed oil paint into it to give it sort of these bluish greenish tones. And so there's this sort of watery, murky, sort of drowny feeling quality to it. And as you move these bricks and look at it from different angles, like the portraits are interesting how they sort of can float to the top, float to the surface, or recess back into the back, depending upon how you look at them. So they're very multidimensional, and again, very heavy in feel. And I love how the finishing of these really speaks to how I was feeling at the time and how so many people of color have felt during those 4 years, and you know, even now as we progress. From there, I was firmly in my Tucson studio and started really wondering, well, what am I going to make now, and what's new on the agenda? I want to leave all of this bad feeling that I had with Crossroads behind and start working on something else. And so I'm sitting in my studio one day, and we have a few tattered American flags sort of hanging around that we use for props and for different shoots. And I saw this one hanging, and I was thinking about it, like, well, who made this flag? And you know, we have this story about Betsy Ross, and there's some conflicting stories about whether Betsy Ross actually really existed or not. And so I was thinking, like, maybe this is a fictional character, we don't know, but why would they give this person this credit of making the flag? I'm thinking whoever it was that made the flag could not have made the flag without the cotton or the hemp or whatever it was made out of being grown. And the only people that were growing those crops were Black people. And so I wondered again, like, why we are not getting the credit that we deserve for what we have contributed to this country, the culture, the music, the art, the dance, the fashion, you know, so much that we have contributed in innovation in sciences and medicine, this is Black History Month. You can Google it. There's a lot that we've done, and you have never heard any of it in school. So it really got my wheels turning as to, how can I make something that pays tribute to the Black women specifically who born the children, to make the crops, to make this flag. Like, how can I pay homage to those women? And so I created this portrait that is, some people say it's like the Black Betsy Ross. I call it How to Make a Country. It's a soft spot one for me. Like, I really enjoyed making this portrait. My dog, as you see there at the bottom, he loves being in the photos. As soon as I set up the lights in the studio and bring down the backdrop, that guy is on the stage, ready to go. It doesn't like, we have to pull him off the stage. He literally will sit there and just stare out at the camera. So you gotta like physically move him. But when I was doing this, he kind of moseyed on up next to me and laid down, and I'm clicking the shutter, which is probably under my skirt. I'm clicking it with my toe. And when I went and I looked at the pictures, I was like, it's actually quite perfect that he's in there. And there's this beautiful sort of, I don't know, it feels like a very domestic home moment. There's this, there's a beautiful quality that he adds to the photo that just wasn't there in the other ones that he wasn't in. So that's How to Make a Country. And then I wanted to move into a similar type of a feeling, but along the same lines. And this is a project that is still ongoing. This one is Take a Look Inside. And, it's at the same sort of seating level and position as How to Make a Country. So they belong in a series together. You can see the flowers and the cotton are in a similar position. In the last one, she's holding the flag. In this one, she's holding this book that says, Take a Look Inside. And she's very much similar to the Queen in that way, where there is this, this requesting to look inside, to see the truth, to see how much we have given and who we really are, because we get these narratives thrown at us so much that it is so easy to buy into. It's so easy to start believing that these things that are said about us are wrong, or that are the history that we were being taught is somehow correct. And so, I like to throw these reminders into my work sometimes to like wake people up, to hopefully inspire them to look within a little bit deeper and to really understand who they are and how much has been contributed through them. Here's a little background shoot behind the scenes on How to Make a Country. You can see the cord from my from my shutter. And these pieces are also finished in resin. The difference is that these have metal frames around them, but the resin is not, like, the photos are not encased in the resin and encased into the frame. The images are floated into this metal frame, which, let's see, here's me sanding. Here's a finished piece. So you can see that they're sort of floated, and there's maybe like a 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more around the edge. They kind of look like, to me, like slate, the way that they're polished and finished, and the way that they sort of lay in there. They kind of feel like these slate pieces, and they have a beautiful sort of matte finish to them. And I just love this sort of antique, vintage quality that gives it. So that was in 2019, and then we found ourselves in a pandemic, and I kind of tanked for a while, as so many people did. I don't know, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, it was novelty for me. You know, I spent probably like 3 months sitting in my bathtub, filling it up with hot water, pretending like it was a hot tub to keep myself entertained while watching Netflix. And then I got pretty old when I realized that this pandemic thing is not ending anytime soon. And then I started to sort of get a little bit concerned because I had no ideas, and I was so frazzled by the state of the world and everything happening, and this now, you know, this like looming death right around us all the time. And I really just sort of shut down. And I started getting scared because I thought, well, I don't know when I'm going to make work again. And then George Floyd was murdered. And I was already feeling quite upset around Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And then when George Floyd's death happened, when he was murdered, I don't know. I think everything that was bottled up inside just sort of came out. And I was just so upset at the audacity of this, and the audacity to be able to take a Black person's life. And in these other cases, like Breonna Taylor's, murderers still haven't been brought to justice. So, you know, it's just this ongoing thing that you just watch the people who look like you being murdered, and there's nothing being done about it. And it really does make you feel like you're walking around with a target on your back. And I felt like that for much of 2020, 2021. So I made this triptych called White Privilege because I really wanted to give people who did not look like me a sense of what it feels like. I wanted to give people an idea of what it feels like to live in this all of the time. And so I had this pig's head that I got from a butcher in Phoenix, Arizona. And I stuck him on a silver tray, and he has a silver spoon in his mouth. And of course, he has this American flag that he's laying on top of. He is flanked by all the trappings of our culture. He's got the Bible, he's got guns, he's got these chess pieces that symbolize Black lives and white lives. He also has the candles on either side of him that symbolize Black lives and white lives. The Black lives have the black ribbon around it. Then we have, you know, the symbols of nature. We have the fruit and the flowers and these things that symbolize our nature. And then he has this mirror behind his head, and he just cannot see his own reflection. He is completely unaware of himself and how he is just laying on all of this. My idea with this is that I would allow this pig to disintegrate over the course of a few weeks in the hot Arizona summertime, and photograph the progression of this. And so we moved into the second part of this, where you can start to see him oozing into all of these things. He's now starting to ooze into our flag. He's oozing into our faith. He's oozing into our nature. The flames on the candles are getting lower, and all of this is happening, and he still cannot see his own reflection. In the third panel, more of the same, very much just everywhere. And now we have the black ribbon, which is hard to see in this because it's small. The black ribbon has fallen onto the seashell in a flame. So, you know, there's this sort of extinguishing the embers of these Black lives. And now the bugs are starting to creep in, and there's a rot and a stench happening, and he still cannot see himself. This work was important for me it was also one of the hardest things I ever had to do, because as you can imagine, it was horrific. And it smelled worse than it looked. I mean, I don't know. I don't know which one was worse. I still have nightmares. I've never seen anything like this, and I won't even go into the description of it. You guys can imagine. It was awful. I'm standing on a cinder block because this is the third panel. I think actually you can see him sort of like leaned over backwards if you look really carefully. He had fallen over, and so I had my partner prop him up, and when he did, like everything just came out of him. And so the floor of this chicken coop where I was photographing was basically covered in sawdust, but it was moving like an ocean. So there was no way I was having my feet on that ground. I was firmly on that cinder block. And I did my entire shoot standing on a little tiny block. But you know, the smell of it, the sight of it all really spoke to me about how gross all of this is, and how disgusting it all is, and how, you know, some of us have to really experience that all of the time, while others have the privilege to not experience that. And so when I did this, I had the idea that I wanted to print this huge 3 panels the size of a room that you'd have to walk into, because I really wanted everyone to see it and experience it the same way that people of color have to experience this. Here's the printing of the triptych. And then I'm just going to take you into some other works. Some of these are newer projects that I'm working on. Some of them are older projects that I've started that I am planning on moving back into. And I'm just taking my time with some of this stuff. You know, I don't feel like I always have to start a project, work, you know, linearly through that project and finish it before starting another one. I try to really allow the work to dictate my pace. I try to allow the work to dictate not just the flow, but like how it all is how it's all moving. So sometimes, you know, things move faster than others. So these are all right now individual works, and some of them I do make as just individual works, like this one, which is titled Weekends at Nana's. And this one was a moment that I needed to pause. So here's something that I get asked about a lot. You know, my work can be, the narrative of my work can be very heavy and very political, and it can be like a lot, you know, it really can be a lot sometimes. And so I need to take pauses between this, you know, those types of works, and just do things that feel good to me, you know, that feed my soul again, that allow me to come back into a place of appreciation and gratitude, and, you know, not always feeling so angry and like I have to articulate this anger. So I made this piece, Weekend at Nana's, because I was really missing my grandmother, who passed away many, many years ago. And I realized that, you know, I am moving into these different phases of my life, and that I haven't been able to share with her. And, you know, I was thinking about her softness and her willingness to always be so present with me and my brothers and my mom and my dad, you know, our family. And she just had this really quiet gentleness. I mean, her name's Grace, and she really embodied that name. And I just, you know, I was really missing her one day, and I thought I wanted to make this still life to sort of remind me of her. I'd go to her apartment in Queens, and we'd stay the weekend. And every weekend, you know, Saturday, we'd go over there Friday night, and Saturday morning, we'd wake up in the morning and she'd make pancakes for us. And And then after pancakes, she'd sit me down on the floor and she would comb my hair and, lovingly just braid my hair. And after that, we would climb out of the kitchen window onto the roof of this apartment building and hang out on the roof and look at all the traffic going by. Totally dangerous, probably not the best idea, but it was such a joyous time for us. And there was like no cares in the world. So this is a very sweet piece for me, a very personal piece and an homage to my grandmother. And then I worked on things like this, which is a self-portrait. And this was one of the first self-portraits I did. I did this actually prior to the How to Make a Country. And, I use myself in works from time to time because I'm either testing and like the way that the test went, so I keep it in the series, or like in the cases now during COVID where I can't get people into my studio, I'm starting to make a lot more self-portrait work. With this particular one, I really was feeling this calling to use this heart. And I'm going to show you another image coming up soon. I used this heart, it's a pig's heart. And I used it for another photo that I did, another portrait that I did. And I had it, and I just felt so bad getting rid of it. It didn't feel right to just throw it away. So I incorporated it into another photo. And I remember waking up at 3:00 in the morning with this idea, like, I want to make this piece that feels like this. And so I set up the lights and I just jumped up on the table and got to work. This piece is really speaking to the Philosopher's Stone and finding the gold within, and sort of like removing these obstacles and these conditionings and these fears and these burdens that we all walk around with to come back to what is true and what is real. And this seems to be a theme that keeps getting presented in my work over and over again. Bayanamu is another portrait that I actually, in this finished piece, the symbols on it are gold leafed. This one also speaks to alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone, and I was sort of trying to incorporate that idea into that of the Black woman. Benjia is another one. And then what if we could do 1963 all over again is a portrait of these 4 beautiful girls who died in the church bombing in Birmingham. And so I wanted to sort of recreate this version of them if they had been able to live their lives, and who they could have been. I worked on a series of florals as a way to break up some of the political deep stuff that I work on from time to time. And this is the portrait that I did initially with that same pig's heart. And then I started working on a series of nudes, which is something that I'm going to come back to. I'm not exactly sure what I'm trying to say with this work yet, but I love the direction that it's going in, and I just wanted to show you guys some of the newer work that I'm working on. I think it's important that for me that I'm showing Black female bodies in a way that is beautiful, and also, this idea of presenting us in art history is important, and so I wanted to put us in this context. So this is an idea that I'm currently working with. And some other newer projects are the Colonized Foods, which is a series of still lifes that will feature bananas and watermelons, sugar and sugarcane and rice and potatoes and lots of other things that we eat on a daily basis that have these sort of darker stories and darker lineage that we don't think about. And so with this series, I'm really asking people to start to look around you and question the things that we buy, the things that we eat, the things that we put on ourselves, and like, where do they come from and who is affected by our consumerism? And during the pandemic, I worked on a series of still lives that is an ongoing process. Some of them, as you can see, pay homage again to art history. This one is, I'm sure, very familiar to you, with Frida Kahlo and her sitting with herself. My dog made it into the photo again. Here's another one. And then I have this one that I've entitled The Master, and it is by no means do I consider myself a master. If you know anything about this guy, it is paying homage to him and his beautiful lighting that I covet in most of my photography, but also I wanted to reclaim the title or the word master, because it is so loaded and so it's so charged, and I just wanted to reclaim it, and to title a Black woman the master can be very triggering to some people, and so that's what I'm here for. I'm here to trigger. So thank you so much. I'm sure I'm well over time, and I was trying to jam through those last ones so that we can get to questions. So if you have any questions or want me to go back to any of those other slides, I'm happy to do so.
Yes, please post your questions. I was texted a few, and then I do have a few myself, so I can start us off.
Do you want me to stop sharing, or?
Real sorry to interrupt. No, you can just I'll just keep it secret, and then we'll pull it back in if we need to.
To reference. Okay.
All right. So one of the questions I received was, you had touched base a little bit on mixing acrylic paint with the resin. Do other mediums influence your work?
Yes. Obviously, painting plays a huge part in my work, even though I'm not a painter. I appreciate that medium so much. I think, I kind of joke and say that I am a frustrated painter. And so I make my photographs look like paintings because I can't paint. But really, I take a lot of my cues from paintings. I mean, my sort of self-education in art has in large part been mostly painting and drawings. As I started getting older, I started to appreciate other mediums a lot more, like sculpture and photography, but painting and drawing has always been the thing that I come back to. It's a part of me, and you know what? And it's probably because my father is a painter, and as I was growing up, I watched him paint. And sitting in the museums and looking at the light on these Dutch, still lives and these portraits, like, really has heavily influenced me. I don't really use a whole bunch of different materials in my work other than the varnish, the resin, and it is oil paint, not acrylic. I'm sorry if I said acrylic. It's oil paint that I put into the resin. I'm trying to think, do I use anything else? At the moment, no, but gold leaf. I do gold leaf. Yeah, but I'm not adverse. Like, for me, I'm using materials that make sense to the story that I'm trying to tell. So I'm open, I'm really open to exploring that. So right now that's what I'm using, but I think in the future it will probably grow.
Great. Another question I got was, it's a two-parter. How much does post-process affect your work? Does editing the image, such as using that, making the picture frame, spark more thought than taking or clicking the actual camera button?
Does making the frame take more thought than making the photo? Was that the question?
Yeah, or like, does it spark more thought?
I can't say that there's, I don't know how to equate one to the other. They're different processes, but they're all part of the same thing, if that makes sense. So I try to think of it like, okay, I start with this idea, and then I go in and I photograph it. And then I take that photograph and I look at it and I decide, how do I want to process this? Excuse me, let me back up. Before I even consider processing it, I have to have my light perfect. If there's anything that I obsess about, it is the light. The light has to be perfect. So I start there. And then once I get the photo, then I look at it and I decide what needs to happen to that in order for it to tell the story that I want to tell. Does it need to be darker in tone? Does it need to be brighter in tone? Do I want to add texture into the background like I do with so many of my work? I add textures into the background. Do I want to color those textures, right? So like I start to make those creative decisions along the way as I start to figure out what it is that this story is saying. Most oftentimes there is not a huge amount of extra stuff that I'm doing. I usually process it first in Lightroom by adjusting it and making sure that it's perfect. I get it like perfect in Lightroom. And then I take it into Photoshop, where I will add in a texture and sort of mask it off and leave the texture in the background. And that's really, maybe shifting the color just a little bit, but outside of that, that's really the most that I'm doing to these photos. Some dodging and burning and just bringing out highlights and like maybe adjusting shadows, but I'm not really, with the exception of this new work, like this one with the chain, I'm not, or, with the double figures, I'm not really doing a whole lot of extra Photoshop-y type stuff, or what do you call it? Like, I forgot spacing on the name. There's a term for this. Blending and things. Like, I'm not really doing a whole bunch of that stuff on most of my work. Like this picture is mostly straight out of camera, with the exception of the texture that I added into the background. I spent a lot of time getting the light right. And as you can see, the texture, I try to keep it so that it's sort of creeping onto the, I keep the face, I always keep the face very clear, but the body and like the shoulder area, I try to keep some of the texture lightly creeping into those areas to add extra texture to it. I try to think about it like a painting. Like if I were a painter, this wouldn't be perfect like a photo. When it's crispy clear, it looks like a photo to me. But when there's a little bit of blending of the colors and a blending of the textures, to me, it lends itself more into a painting. And so I do that kind of work in Photoshop. I don't know if that answered your question. The frames, oh my gosh. I don't necessarily think that the frames, like making the frames and making the finished pieces when I'm finishing the work, I don't think that that is more or less thought. It's a part of the whole process. Like I really try to think it through all the way. Like, how am I going to present this? And what are people going to see in that presentation? I could just put the print in a frame and call it a day. But if making the frame out of metal means that, symbolizes the box that we live within, the sort of hard, cold structure that we live within, then by all means, I'm going to go out of my way to make that.
All right, thank you. Next question, in re-inhabiting history in this way, how much research do you do, and what does research look like for you?
I do a fair amount of research. I like to consider myself a fun person, but then when I go back and I look at like my Audible list, I'm like, I am not fun. Like I'm currently reading a book called The History of, what is it called? Like The History of Everything, or something like there would be the dawn of history or something. Like the books that I read are, not necessarily academic, but they are very, very studied, if you will. Like, I'm not a fiction reader. I read a lot of history. I think that if I could go back in time and decided that I wasn't going to be a photographer, an artist, that I would definitely have been a historian or an anthropologist, because I just am so, I'm fascinated by history, and I'm fascinated by how people have made decisions over time, and how we interact with each other. And those things are really, they're fascinating to me. So I do read a lot of history. I watch a lot of documentaries. If I am going into a subject like colonized foods, I will read up on all the foods, and I will do all the studying on where bananas came from, all the wars that bananas have caused, all the money that has gone into these wars, the many people who have died so we could eat bananas, right? I researched watermelons, and why, I start with these questions like, why do watermelons present such an instinctual fear in some of us, and these stereotypes that come with something like a watermelon. And I'm like, this is absurd. Like, why? And so like, I am investigating things that I want answers to. So, and I think that that's important, that, the research that I'm doing, it's pretty extensive. So I have to be interested in the subject. Like, it has to be something that I want to learn about and that I want to know. So yeah, I do a fair amount of reading to get the work done.
All right, and we have time for one more. Beautiful, beautiful work. Weekend at Nana's made me tear up. I was curious about the abundance of flowers in your work. Can you expand on your process of choosing the flowers, props, costuming?
Flowers are, seem to be like a theme through a lot of my work, and it was not necessarily intentional. I felt the need to give some levity to some of this stuff, and so having something like flowers in there creates this space for us to pause and just appreciate beauty. Plus, I love flowers, and I love how flowers photograph, and something like peonies are something that I use a lot in my work because I just love them. There's no other real reason for it. I know that, people are like, oh, well, peonies mean this, and, these flowers mean that. And I know that there's meaning behind all of this stuff, but I'm not necessarily choosing the flowers in that way for that. I do use a lot of different types of symbols in my work. Not just the flowers, but like the fruit as well, which to me symbolizes abundance. And it's something that in Dutch still lifes and in portraiture, when you see that kind of stuff, it means that there was, people had the money to allow these fruit, and these foods and these cheeses to rot on the table. It also symbolized death and all sorts of other things, right? So depending upon what type of work I'm doing, I'll choose props to sort of back up that messaging to help in this symbolic part of that narrative, if that makes sense. So like, for example, let's go back to white privilege. Which is very heavily loaded in so many ways, but like everything on this table has meaning and purpose. And so it was very, very thought out, everything on here means something. And so I really do try to put a lot of thought into the props. I also am a very much a DIY kind of person. I don't have money to spend on big budgets for shoots and stuff like that. So I use what is around my house. I'm lucky in that I share a studio with another incredible, amazing photographer who has collected an assortment of weird things over the years. And so I can just go back into the workshop and pull out a box of bones, or pull out a box of teeth, or pull out a box of roadkill, or a box of candles, or you name it. We got a whole collection of weird things in our workshop. And so that really helps, you know, to have these things at my disposal and be able to say, you know, oh, I need this symbol, and I can go back in the workshop and find something, you know, a crucifix that works, this, you know, particular piece. But yeah, the props, you know, I don't spend a lot of money on. Like I said, it's stuff that I find, or I have around the house, or I try to ask friends if I'm looking for something specific, if they have it, or I go to the thrift store, and that's usually the way that I source my stuff.
All right. So Alanna, thank you again so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was it was a real pleasure. I appreciate your time.
And thank you everyone for coming. Please be safe, and I hope everyone has a good night.